Welcome, everyone, as you flood into the Zoom website for our webinar on Hong Kong universities navigating in unknown waters. And that's a topic which I think a lot of people are going to find very interesting at the moment. Everyone is watching what's happening in Hong Kong. And all of us who know the universities in Hong Kong are very concerned that they survive, that they come through and continue to be the wonderful institutions that they have been. We've got two very welcome presenters today. Hugo Horta at the Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong, and William Lowe, who's at the Education University of Hong Kong. And they are, in fact, research collaborators. Let me take you through the webinar protocols. Some of you will have heard this before. Now, remember that the webinar is being recorded, so your interventions in the chat and on camera in the Q&A session will be available for all time. They usually go up on our website within 48 hours, and also the video will go onto YouTube as well. Now, please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to come in. There's no need to have your video on during the webinar, but please do so when asking a question. It makes it more fun for everyone. We recommend using speaker view so that you can more clearly see who is talking at that moment. To ask a question, you use the chat function. We recommend that you draft your questions. Start doing so towards the end of the presentations, which usually take about half an hour. It's important to put your question in the chat in good time. If a question comes in the last 10 minutes or 5 minutes of the webinar, we can't always accommodate it. Questions that come in early and they're cogent and on the topic of the webinar will be picked up in the Q&A. Q&A is an important part of our webinars, and we will look forward to that. Without any further hesitation, let me hand over to my friend and colleague from the Journal of Higher Education, Hugo Horta.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. We are basically two scholars. I will be giving a perspective of sort of an outsider that is in Hong Kong for 6 years now, and will give a completely different perspective, a perspective of a local that has been living in Hong Kong for much longer than I did. All right, let me jump straight to the topic. And I think it's important to give a bit of history and context of higher education in Hong Kong before we really tackle the main topic. So the first thing I want to say is that we're talking about a higher education system that could be hardly considered a system until the 1960s. The University of Hong Kong was created in 1911. And basically only in the 1960s, the Chinese University of Hong Kong was created. And this was a situation that remained until the 1990s. So hardly a system. And then in the 1990s, several universities were either granted university status or were created. This means that we had a system that for a long time rested on one university, then for also considerable periods on two universities, and only after the 1990s, it became much larger. Basically, we had a system that grew basically on steroids, and where its universities are still in a process of transition to a very large extent from teaching universities to research universities, even if some of them with differences are more developed in this than others. In terms of the development of the system, in terms of enrollment of students, it's also important to realize that up to the late 1980s, Hong Kong was mainly an elite higher education system, according to Martin Tro's taxonomy. And only after it massified since then, and only after 2007, we can really consider the system as a universal system. The development of the system, of the higher education system in Hong Kong, related to the huge demand for higher education from the population, but also was part of a rationale of using education as a tool of economic development and as part of a transition from a more industrial social economic structure to a more service-oriented structure, the structure that we have today. The industry moved first to Shenzhen and then elsewhere. The territory specializes in high-end services, mainly finance, but also high-end retail, and continues to be a trade hub for commodities. Considering this evolution, this very fast evolution, is quite surprising actually, that such a system ends up having always 3 to 4 universities in the top 100 rankings worldwide. And this is partly to the fact that English is an official language of the territory, which leads to a large majority of the academics to publish in English, to feel comfortable publishing in English, but also to the fact that the territory is highly internationalized, both in terms of activities and with a substantial number of foreign academics, non-local academics. It has a very good ability to attract talented human capital, not only to academia, but also in terms of students and other professionals. It acts as a regional or global science network pole with internationalist perspective, so always very turned to the outside, and a culture of cooperation and competition, which is associated very strongly to an identity, an academic identity which rests on academic freedom and autonomy. All of this is embedded in a very capitalistic kind of mindset. One is recognized here by what one is able to produce. And it's not strange that Hong Kong assumed wholeheartedly marginalism and performativity as guiding mantras. And basically academics adopted it very well. And one of the reasons that we can see this adoption is those who stay are those who really take this on board and feel fine with it. Okay, so this is quite an important aspect to understand universities in Hong Kong. Universities in Hong Kong are also places of assimilation and convergence of cultures and of management and organizational models. Sometimes they are functional, sometimes they are at odds. It's not really perfect, but a lot of what we have in universities in Hong Kong results from a lot of policy borrowing with some adaptation. A lot of this policy borrowing is from the United Kingdom. I think if I say names such as the RGC, Research Grants Committee, those who are in the UK, this name still rings a bell because it was a name that the same kind of institution had in the past, according to what some colleagues told me. And it adopts also models from the US universities, almost complete emulations, such as the tenure track and the conditions that lead one to get tenure and progress in the career. What the territory has as very strong suits to attract people is high salary and the possibility to work in a very cosmopolitan, dynamic and thriving academic environment and society as well. But actually the funding for science and the funding for the investment in knowledge actually lags behind. I mean, this is something that the government of Hong Kong recognized even before 2019 and had a plan to try to change. But it's something that there is one of the flaws or one of the less competitive aspects of the system. I tend to argue that what sustains the academic knowledge capacity of Hong Kong universities are the extreme working capacity of the academics that work in them, the professionalism of the administrative and technical staff that supports academic work, but also the effectiveness of the whole work, and specific environmental characteristics that I mentioned before: competition, collaboration, academic autonomy and freedom, cosmopolitanism, and international focus. So this is just to give very quickly an idea of what the system is. Now, in 2019, there was an event, a social event that completely transformed, or I wouldn't say transformed, but impacted severely society in the territory. A movement called, a social movement, also called the Anti-Extradition Law Amendment Bill movement. And basically, before really getting into this movement and what it meant to the universities and to the society in Hong Kong, I want to say three things that I think are critical to be understood so that we can have a clear idea about what the movement was. First, although Hong Kong was never or never had a fully democratic regime, this didn't prevent Hong Kong people to show their discontent and disagreement with the authorities. And we have riots in 1966, in 1967, actually this riot with strong influence in the creation of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and another one in 1981. And there were several protests, some of them more peaceful, some of them more violent. So this is something that is not new. And it happened when the United Kingdom controlled the territory, and also happened after the territory changed to Chinese sovereignty. Now, the second point that I want to make is that the movement of 2019 was not a movement started by university students or university student associations. Due to evolution of the crisis, some universities became battlegrounds, and some of them suffered badly from it, namely PolyU and the Chinese University of Hong Kong. But my feeling is that there is a global impression that students were somehow leading it from the start, or heavily involved in it from the start. This is incorrect. Actually, there was no one leading the 2019 protests, and the decision seemed to be taken commonly in the social media about what to do next. The protests were protests of, with a kind of a flavor of a guerrilla and attrition. And, you know, the steps were decided online. Now, the third thing that I want to make clear here, the protests were not about demanding the independence of Hong Kong from China. Okay? This was an idea that I've seen sometimes referred. This was not what the protests were about. The protests were about something completely different, and we can talk about the Q&A about that. Now, the causes for the events of the 2019 social movement are multiple, and in my opinion, they relate to a complex web of social and economic inequalities, geopolitical and local positionings and politics, but also to matters of culture and identity, with losers and winners and expectations that failed to be met. These events were a cause of significant concern for university managers and academics. The academics were particularly stressed and concerned because they were worried about the safety of the students. And when we talk about students, it's about those that academics believed were participating actively in the protests, but also others that could be targets of the protests. So there was a concern with the students overall, no matter which position or camp they might defend. Academics were quite cautious to talk about what was happening because it was clear that there were colleagues supporting opposite camps. Since emotions were quite extreme at that point, it was quite difficult to talk rationally with colleagues. Probably myself as an outsider would have some kind of leeway in this, but everybody was very constrained about talking about what was going on. It is important to say that this was quite impactful. I mean, and when I mean impactful, I mean that these protests led to divorces, splits in families, friends stopped talking to one another, some shops without clients because the owners decided to support one camp. I mean, it was extremely divisive and it was extremely stressful. Some were supporting the blue camp, the others were supporting the yellow camp. It was particularly heartbreaking to see this happening to the city because the idea was there was a feeling of an end of cycle and a feeling that the city was in decline and probably would never recover from it. Although I would argue that this is probably premature to consider because riots and other movements happened in the past, and both the society and the universities thrived from them and after they ended. So it was kind of a phenomenon that couldn't be avoided. And when I talked to some colleagues that, like me, spend a lot of our days actually in front of a computer refreshing pages and watching live streams of the confrontations and trying to figure out what could be done and how come the situation has reached the point it got to. It was disrupting, as you can imagine, for academic work, because if you're in front of the computer always seeing this, we're really not working. The mental condition to work was not there. But at the same time, this process brought some interesting things. So one thing that I remember seeing in the campus was mainland Chinese students celebrating the National Day of China, bringing the Chinese flag, and worried about them when I saw them with that, because I was thinking, well, this might trigger some violence and some confrontations. But at the same time, I ended up reflecting on the freedom that allowed them to express themselves, even in these moments. And it was a quite positive thing to see. This was a crisis that with many moments, and university leaders, honestly, in my opinion, tried their best to manage a situation that was obviously out of control and obviously out of their control. The crisis actually ended up damaging universities substantially, but except for the major damages that Poly and Chinese youth suffered, I think a lot of the fears were not really met. There was, for example, a fear that non-local students, excuse me, would stop coming. And this means both mainland Chinese students and international students, that talented prospective academics and researchers would find the city too dangerous because of the way the protests were shown on television. I remember in August 2019, I went to my country on vacation, and looking at Portuguese media, it seemed that a civil war was happening or something really, really violent, when it was not the case. There was also worries, more recent worries, that both students, international students, and potential talented would also not come to Hong Kong because of the enactment of the national security law and the potential concerns regarding academic autonomy and freedom, and that ultimately the prestige of Hong Kong universities would be diminished. However, I mean, I can say that 1 year or a year and a half past this, the number of applicants from mainland and abroad are increasing. This is also possible the result of a second crisis, which is the pandemic, that probably reversed some of the potential effects of the first crisis of 2019. And I remember actually in 2019 interviewing applicants for my master program, the one I coordinate, and I was quite surprised when they expressly told me, there's no problem. I will still go to Hong Kong. I'm still interested in learning from Hong Kong universities. I applied to your university and your program, but I also applied to other universities in Hong Kong. So this tells a lot that the students were still interested to come. Now, impact of the 2019 movement in terms of research, academics continue to collaborate globally in producing research. And as far as I feel it, and I talked with some colleagues to gauge their impressions, there's not really a feeling at this point that the autonomy or freedom of academics has been constrained. The ordinance about academic freedom in Hong Kong is still in place. If one thinks though about the institutional autonomy in terms of leadership of the universities, then this might be something different. But I think it's still mostly related to the fallout from the umbrella movement of 2014. And there's plenty of cases such as Benny Tai being fired. So Benny Tai was heavily involved in the Occupy Central part of the umbrella movement from the Faculty of Law. So he was fired due to that participation. Johan's pro-democracy activist and lawyer apparently was blocked from a position for pro-vice chancellor. And there are other cases where basically one can see ingerence or attempting ingerence of the government to kind of control what was going on in the universities and try to, how to put this, try to get rid of the more problematic academics that were involved directly in the protests. Now, the introduction of the national security law brought some concern, and this concern is basically twofold. One is uncertainty about it than anything else, and the possibility that one is accused and then get trial in mainland China, where we know it's a known fact, the judiciary is politicized. However, while there is this fear, one needs to know that Jimmy Lai, which is the owner of Apple Daily, also a big defender of the pro-democracy kind of movement, he was arrested, sentenced by a judge in the Hong Kong High Court. So he was judged by a Hong Kong court. He could leave on bail, but then he returned to jail. But I think he's doing some of his jail time in Hong Kong. Because of the concerns with the national security law, because nobody really knew what it entailed, at least at the University of Hong Kong, we had the Dean of the Faculty of Law and a member of the senior management team coming to explain what it was and how we could be affected. And they tried to reassure basically the academics, although I have to say that some gray areas remain. But what seems to me, and all that I'm saying here is a personal view. So I'm not saying it's what is actually happened or 100% correct. It's my view. But it seems basically in terms of what can be published is business as usual, but one needs probably to be a bit more careful if one goes to the newspapers with political views or gets involved in local politics. So this means that most likely the ones most affected will be academics that are local from Hong Kong. Since many of the newspapers, radio shows or television are in Cantonese, so they are the ones who will be invited, and they are also the ones who understand better what is going on from societal, economic, and political perspectives. The other thing is we need to be a bit careful with what we say in class, and not exactly because we can't say things, but it's much more related to how this can be interpreted by students that might lead them to commit some actions, and basically they can say, oh, okay, I thought this was what my professor was telling me, if that happens. And if these actions go against the government or a disruption of public security and things like that, it can be problematic. The biggest concern that everybody expressed to me when I talked to several colleagues about this is the danger of self-censorship. But this is, I think, is something that deserves really a much broader discussion, because self-censorship is an increasing threat to academic freedom and speech worldwide. And we have self-censorship not only in authoritarian countries, but also in democratic countries. And it's part of the pressures from society and the government towards the autonomy of academics and of academia in general, in my opinion. Then, funny situation, while the 2019 crisis was abating, we had a new crisis, the pandemic, and it led to some funny situations. In October 2019, people were forbidden to use masks in public. Then the pandemic came, and the government had to enact a reverse of this, where everybody should kind of wear masks in public. So a new crisis, but to be honest, the effects of the pandemic here were not really different from other places, except that universities were already in crisis management. So there was not a problem. They were already prepared. It was just one crisis next to the other. And basically, in a way, I think the pandemic was beneficial, because with the political situation between China and Australia and other geopolitical circumstances, plus the pandemic evolution in Hong Kong, where it was very well controlled, and it's still very well controlled, a lot of students end up choosing Hong Kong. Okay, and basically I think I'll stay here and I'll pass it on to Will. We can continue to discuss this in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. William.
Thank you, Hugo. I think I will keep my part short in order to reserve more time for discussions. So like Hugo, I'm going to share some of my observations about the current situations. But before that, let me share with you the ongoing debate on the direction of the development of Hong Kong after 1997. I think I say it's ongoing, but I guess we have an answer now. So one argument is, or one theory is that Hong Kong needs to become Chinese. It means that based on the political and economic development after 1997, Hong Kong becomes closer to China. And so Hong Kong should be a Chinese city, should be a Chinese global city. So this is one of the arguments. There's a counter argument or counter theory saying that Hong Kong needs to remain global because we are special, because we are a global frontier. This perspective is more about historical ones. So it's from a historical perspective, saying that, okay, this is the context. This is why the nature of these cities. So this is the logic of the first theory. First, okay, we witnessed the rise of China in the last 2 or 3 decades, and Hong Kong has become more and more dependence on China. Politically, it's part of China. Economically, we rely on Chinese economies, and socially, cross-border mobility is very common now. So what we need to do is to intensify the integration with the mainland. This is the direction of the development of the city. So we should embrace the national development. So how this can be related to higher education? So this is Hugo's University, which has a hospital in Shenzhen, neighboring cities of Hong Kong. And likewise, Chinese University of Hong Kong has a campus in Shenzhen too. And more recently, the Chinese central government has this Greater Bay area plan, which aims to encourage or facilitate the integrations among Hong Kong, Macau, and 9 cities in South China. So within this context, the Hong Kong UST, University of Science and Technology, is going to build a campus in Guangzhou, another city in China. So this is the development linked to the national development. So this is one side of the story or one theory. But there's a counter theory saying that, no, this is not Hong Kong. Why Hong Kong is special? Because we have these political ambiguities which emerge in the colonial or Cold-War context, which provide the cultural proximities to both East and West. This is how Hong Kong can be connected between China and the world. So this is why we have the University of Hong Kong. I'm not going to share the details, but if you read the literature, you know that the history of the university is a kind of blend of British colonialisms and Chinese nationalisms. So as Hugo mentions, somehow this cultural context explains why we have Chinese university in the territories, and somehow we try to reserve these features or characteristics to establish the UST, another major university in Hong Kong. So this is an argument saying that this is why or how Hong Kong is special. This is why we want one country, 2 systems. So this is another argument. I did some field research talking to university leaders, vice presidents, dean, associate in the territories. What they share with me somehow, reflect both theories. So on the one hand, they were aware of the importance of the national developments to the university, so that they said that they're keen to join the national projects, Greater Bay Area, or better enroll on the one hand. But on the other hand, they say that this is our role. We want to be cultural broker. No, this is a term from them. Or we want to facilitate tripartite partnerships between universities in the West and our partners in the mainland. So this is, some evidence showing that both theories make sense to a certain extent. But that, as Hugo mentions, we have protests in 2019, then we have the national security law last year. So I would suggest that, the political ambiguities is likely to fade from the territory. So if we follow the second theory, we'll ask whether or not the cultural proximity can go on, can be sustainable. And if we don't have it, we are no longer can be a global frontier, can we still play a role of connector? So this is one of the argument, or I would suggest maybe it ends the debate. And I think this is an example explaining why I say that the political ambiguities has gone. So I'm not going to repeat what this professor said. And I need to emphasize that she has not been sued. But you know, you can read what she said from this news clip. This example shows us that, you know, something was politically sensitive, controversial, or incorrect. But now in the current context, it can be illegal. So this is the major change in which, with which I think that the ambiguity I have mentioned has gone. But if we stick with the first theory, we will say that, okay, Hong Kong will be fine, you know, that we will be okay if China is still going to grow and open up. Hong Kong used to be a stepping stone for mainland Chinese students. We provide international opportunity for them. We have a more English-rich environments. We have highly ranked universities. So as Hugo mentions, students are still coming. So we can still play a role, and we can still be a Chinese global cities if we believe this theory. But there's a counter argument, or you know, a more pessimistic views on this is stating that don't forget the intercity competitions. Okay, Hong Kong needs to compete with with other Chinese cities, and if we don't have the global profile, how we can, you know, win in the competitions? Or you know that this is an argument is going more and more visible in Hong Kong now, saying that Shenzhen is going to replace Hong Kong because you know that the GDP of Shenzhen has suppressed Hong Kong a few years ago, and in these cities it has the strongest technological sectors in China. So if we think that okay, industry university partnership is one important component for the future of higher education, as Hugo said that Hong Kong relies on service industries. Hong Kong international profile is going to deteriorate. Then how we can keep our status as a Chinese global cities? So this is an other side of the story. So this is my part. Thank you.
Well, thank you, William, and thank you, Hugo. And there's a lot there for us to think about. I mean, Hugo's given us a tremendous background on the situation, and then William's taken us straight into the identity and strategy and where is Hong Kong going question, which is really important to think about. Us outsiders are interested too, because many of us have been to Hong Kong and have a commitment to Hong Kong as a great cosmopolitan environment. And yes, it is a global site that's very valuable. Whether that's enough in itself to sustain an identity and sustain a world role, of course, is another question. I mean, the idea of Hong Kong sitting between two cultures, East and West, crudely speaking, between China and the world, which is quite a tangible role, really depends on both sides of the equation respecting that role, wanting that role, respecting the autonomy that it presumes, and not trying to claim Hong Kong. And we're now in a situation where not only is China seeking to claim Hong Kong to assert its the inclusion of Hong Kong as part of China, and if necessary to do that by homogenizing Hong Kong in Chinese terms, but also the West is claiming Hong Kong as well. And if you look at the media coverage of Hong Kong and recent events, last 2-3 years, last 5 years, you see that sense of Hong Kong is like part of us, and we think Hong Kong should work according to our rules and our law, and that's what the autonomy of Hong Kong and the one country, two systems really means. It means Hong Kong can continue to be Western, and that, of course, is equally problematic. I've got one question, then we'll go to Alvin Hung, who's got the next question after me. For both of you, but probably for William, trying to work a way through, you know, in terms of a positive long-term future. Hong Kong is not going to be part of the West. It's going to be part of China if it's going to be anywhere. Is there much support inside Hong Kong at the moment for developing Chinese identity in a positive role inside China? And of course, as you've rightly mentioned, Shenzhen nearby. I mean, that Shenzhen can be a rival, can also be a symbiotic partner, immense expertise and resources, including entrepreneurial resources in Hong Kong and in Shenzhen. Maybe there's potential for either a sort of pairing, a cooperation of similar cities, or a pairing based on complementarity and difference.
Hugo, would you like to respond first?
Well, basically, yeah, I think you touched the center of the problem. I mean, this is exactly where the Hong Kong government stands in trying to maintain this balance and being pressured from all sides. And I think people who live in the city feel that. There is this tension about where should we go? What's our next step? And I'm not sure that there is a clear path, honestly, because on the one hand, it's my feeling that there is some willingness to, for example, integrate, to create more synergies with the Greater Bay Area, and namely with Shenzhen, because Shenzhen, as Will shown, indeed, I mean, the wealth of Shenzhen is increasing, the GDP in Shenzhen is increasing, is surpassing Hong Kong. But the thing is, Shenzhen has different characteristics and attributes that Hong Kong does not have, and the reverse as well. So they need each other.
Wait, hello.
Hello, yes.
Alvin,
我聽緊個 seminar， 不如陣間打返俾你啊。你幾點鐘瞓啊？
I'm not sure what's happening there, but it looks like Alvin is trying to come in. But Alvin, you'll have to wait a bit longer. We were hearing an answer to the previous question.
Yeah, so basically there is this duality. On the one hand, there is the eagerness and the willingness to create synergies and to collaborate. But on the other hand, what we have is the other side of the border having a clear idea of what they want. And often what you hear is this kind of pressure saying, so are you guys in or not? Because we need to move. And if you're not, it's okay. We'll simply move without you. So I think there is this tension. And it's not only a tension, once again, in economic terms or in knowledge terms, it's also a tension in terms of maintaining the identity and the role of the city and how to do it. And I think at the moment, there is not a clear strategy on how to do this. And then you have interesting things from the universities, because you have universities like Hong Kong U that, okay, they want to collaborate with mainland, but very cautiously. Because they know they are facing with different ways of thinking, different ways of working, a different mentality. And this was told to me when I interview people that participate in projects between Hong Kong U and the mainland. On the other hand, you have Chinese U. Chinese U have much more experience in doing this. They have trust built with the other side of the border for quite some time. And they feel quite comfortable and happy to do so. Well, people at Hong Kong U will say, sure, collaborating with the mainland is important, but we cannot forget our global stance. We cannot forget our global strategy, which was not as important, for example, in Chinese U. So you have probably different institutions having completely different strategies and approaches in dealing with this. And of course, always expecting to see what is the position, what are the strategy of the Hong Kong government. I don't know if Will wants to add something, and he can disagree with me as well.
Well, I fully agree with you. Just want to add one of a few points. Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think Hong Kong want to be, keeping its making a balance. So GROKO or GUNICO was an approach trying to mediate the two approaches I mentioned. But one, difficult things which I think is not possible to overcome is about, the political ambiguity I mentioned. When it comes to some issues like national identities, so can we be ambiguous on these issues? Or, more recently about, the pro-independence force shared in the communities or among some people. So this kind of issues become, difficult when we talk about making a balance between, national and global. When it turns to be a project or turn to be developments in higher education, we think about, as Hugo mentioned, whether or not, we can retain the characteristics of our institutions. Well, I don't want to give examples here, but that's difficult.
No, I really appreciate the answers from both of you. I've got a number of people on the call list, and I think we'll take Alvin Hung, followed by Aki Yanazawa and Rosemary Deem. So, Alvin, can you come in at this point, please? Hello, Alvin. He's in the webinar.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm just want to ask a question to the speakers that because Hong Kong is known to, in the past, is known to be a place with academic freedom, so we can conduct a lot of research about mainland China, especially those that are considered rather sensitive. Like for the examples that I've raised, like the rights protection lawyers in mainland China, and also the Tiananmen protest. And because for quite a long period of time, Hong Kong has been the place for researchers to conduct these kind of research about China. And it's actually remained this way for quite a long period of time since the Second World War and until now. So I'm wondering, under the new national security law, I think that is it no longer possible that these kind of research can go on in the future? Yeah, this is my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Alvin.
I mean, from what I've seen, yes, I think it can continue. I have colleagues that, both in the Faculty of Education, I remember another case in the Faculty of Economics, that they are basically dealing with quite sensitive topics, and they continue to do their research normally. Actually, it's quite interesting. I was surprised because I'm starting to collaborate a bit more with colleagues in the mainland, and I'm surprised that some results that probably are not as positive or are not as exciting concerning some events and some characteristics, some phenomena that is happening in China, in Chinese society and in Chinese universities as well. They have no problem in terms of put it out there in scientific outlets. I was quite surprised with that, I have to say. Some of it as even some level of criticism to public policies. And I asked if this wasn't going to be a problem, and they say, no, it's perfectly fine. I mean, the big thing here is if you do some kind of research and then you use that research to jeopardize the power of the CCP or something like that, then you are in trouble. Or if you use research to say, okay, based on this research, I think independence of Hong Kong can be advocated for, then you are in trouble. But if you're looking at issues of public policy or issues of social, economic, even political phenomena that do not carry these messages along, I think it's perfectly fine. But yeah, that is at least my understanding so far, up to this point. I don't know if Will has a different view or has the same kind of idea.
Well, my answer will be very short. I think it's too early to make a judgment. So I think it's premature to make a judgment at this point.
My sense in working with colleagues on the mainland is that in the mainland, you can say quite a lot, especially from the leading research universities, until it becomes a problem. When it becomes a problem, it's a problem, and it's a different matter, and then you're in a different place. But until that moment, of course, there's quite a lot of scope. I'd like to bring in Aki Yanazawa.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Hugo and William for the very interesting and insightful discussion. So my question is, as I wrote that I'd like to ask if the old rival relationship between Hong Kong and Singapore is changing under the new local and in terms of the higher education, knowledge hub, or the national control and the university autonomy. So my idea is that by utilizing Singapore as a reference case, that I think it is possible to make some kind of different types of the objective discussion about the current situation of Hong Kong. Thank you.
Will, do you want to start with this one?
Well, first, I'm not sure whether or not Singapore still see us, Hong Kong as a competitors, because Singapore's GDP has surpassed Hong Kong for long, and but after the 2019 protests, there's a lot of discussion about whether or not Hong Kong will lose its status as a financial center, whether or not the foreign investors will move not only to Singapore and but also to Tokyo. And as I mentioned in my presentations, people will think about whether or not the Chinese central government will assign Shenzhen to replace Hong Kong. I think one important thing is that Hong Kong always claim its success or its status is rely on its global profile, but now we see some kinds of restrictions on this global profile. So we want to see whether or not we still have a niche in those inter-urban or intercity competitions. So this is a big question mark, which I briefly mentioned in my presentation.
Thank you, Aki, and thank you both.
Thank you.
Can we bring in Rosemary Deem?
Okay, so what I'm interested in is, clearly, and I think it was a really, really interesting presentation. I think both of you framed it really, really well, and it was very helpful to get the whole kind of history, because otherwise, I guess for some of us, we kind of know bits of it, but you don't know how it fits together. But my question was really that one of the reasons why Hong Kong universities are in the top 100 in the world and other things like that is because they've attracted a lot of international students and staff. But if that kind of global frontier notion of those universities starts to change, and I realize it's a kind of delicate balance at the moment, and maybe there are ways of combining it for certain periods, but if it does, then will those universities in Hong Kong still be popular with international students and staff? And if not, how is that going to change the role and indeed the rankings of Hong Kong universities? Thank you.
Yeah, that is a very good question as well. I think a lot of academics are on a wait and see, especially the international academics are on a wait and see sort of stance to see what happens. And I think if there was a feeling that these academics would not have the necessary autonomy or the necessary freedom to do their work, that most likely a substantial proportion of them would probably move elsewhere. And these would have consequences. This would have consequences for Hong Kong universities because these international colleagues bring a lot of other international colleagues. They establish important networks with countries all over the world. And if they would move, all of these would be lost. At the same time, Hong Kong would lose something that is extremely valuable for the mainland students that come to Hong Kong, which is coming next door and still have an international experience. And part of that international experience is being able to be taught by foreigners, international staff that have different ideas, that have different ways of teaching, that bring a completely different perspective. If this was not here, I think Hong Kong universities would suffer. And this is part of the very delicate kind of situation that we're living on now, and which is part of the question that actually Simon also brought in the beginning of the question session, which is the balance, trying to maintain the status of the city and the status of the university. And how can this balance, how can this environment, this ecology can be maintained, and do the main actors want to maintain it or not? It's going to really depend a lot on that. Although I would say that this is, of course, much more, will have much more incidence in the social sciences and the humanities than in STEM fields. I mean, STEM fields, I don't think they have any problem with this. I don't know, Will?
Well, I totally agree with you. Just one point to add is that, well, if we focus on the soft side of the why we have the global connectivity, is more about, you know, the academic environment, freedom, atmospheres. But on the other hand, you know, that Hong Kong provide relatively good salaries, you know, availability of fundings, or also the opportunities in Asia, in China. This is the attractions that you know, to people who, you know, maybe in other parts of the world. So let's see.
I mean, if I may add, I mean, one of the things, actually, this is why I mentioned the high salary associated with high levels of academic autonomy and freedom. Because this is the thing that Hong Kong and Singapore, to some extent, allow to this international faculty. And also an environment which is international in all of these Hong Kong universities, with differences, of course, but is still majorly international. So working here is not that different than working in some universities in the UK or in some universities in the US. But at the same time, you are in Asia. And if you like Asia, and if you find this region of the world interesting, this is the place to be. Now, the big thing is, if it ceases to be that place, where can these international academics go? Yeah.
Singapore is one possibility, I suppose, but, you know, we never would have thought that Singapore was a more liberal environment than Hong Kong, but maybe things are changing. Now, our questions from here, we've got Joyce Lau next, but then Jayanta Topadar, followed by Richard Dolan, if we have time, and Miguel Lim. Hello, Miguel, how are you? Joyce, you're next.
Hi. Thank you for having me, Professor Martinson. And I agree with you. I think because of the news coverage, which showed the most dramatic parts of the protest, I think something has been lost. The context of where Hong Kong falls in Asia has been lost, because honestly, Hong Kong is still freer than definitely Shenzhen, Shanghai, and has quite comparable situation in Singapore. So anyways, to get to my question, there are some people here in Hong Kong, not me, but some people, who say that because the national security law stopped physical protests and stopped the violence and stopped the clashes on campus, that national security law actually is good for the universities. The other side would say that what national security law took away is actually less tangible. You know, the average student may or may not know about academic freedom. The average kid coming in to study engineering just cares that his campus is safe and secure. So how do you rectify those two opposing concerns?
I would say it's still too soon, really, to answer that. It's difficult to say. I mean, I think that the national security law really had an effect on the protests. That is for sure. Did it end the whole thing? Maybe. I mean, look, let me tell you a story. I arrived here in 2014. and came out of Portugal, arrived here, umbrella movement. And I was completely taken by surprise, and I followed what was happening. And I remember colleagues saying, okay, the umbrella movement didn't work, end of story. What we saw some years later was that we had even greater demonstrations. I don't know. My answer to your questions is that I really don't know. It's too soon to be able to answer that. Will, I don't know if you have a different perspective.
Well, I can just share some my research experience with you. I interviewed some student leaders at universities. Actually, those are leaders of student unions. They share me their observations after the law, that the university management used to be more tolerant to what they did on campus. Now they become more strict to them, and you know that it also caused some kind of tensions between students and management. So this is how the atmosphere or the less tangible part of the university has changed in the current situations. So I don't know whether or not we can find a kind of arguments to respond to the point you have mentioned, but I think those change are felt by people here.
Thanks, Joyce, and thanks, Hugo and Will. I'll have to ask our remaining questioners to be succinct as possible so we can get as much in as we can. Jayanta, you're next. Jayanta, are you still there? Jayanta, if you don't come in 5 seconds, I'll bring in Richard Dolan, who's our next speaker. Okay. Richard
Hi there,
Dolan.
everyone. Thank you very much, Hugo and William, particularly for your presentations there. It was really interesting to get up to date on what's going on in Hong Kong. I used to live in China, and I indeed taught in China between 2006 and 10. And I was always conscious of the things that I could and could not say. I remember a colleague saying to me, you just can't mention the 3 T's, Tiananmen, Taiwan, and Tibet. And I was just interested, having done some work on international branch campuses, of which there are a number, obviously, in the territory, whether there were any impositions on curriculum content, for example, particularly with respect to universities that have associations with the UK, where I'm speaking from now.
Well, I'm not sure whether or not you are talking about the universities in Hong Kong or those branch I mentioned, the Hong Kong's branches in the mainland.
Yeah, so international branch campuses that may be associated with a UK-based university that have established a campus in Hong Kong.
I don't think we see any change up to this point, but okay. You know that the general situations is changing. Well, the government always respond on that we still have university autonomy, academic freedoms, which are protected by the laws, and nothing has been changed. We just provide more security to people and to everyone in the territories. So this is the government stand. So as Hugo mentions, at this point, at the individual levels, we don't feel many changes. So that's what I can share now.
Thank you, William.
Yeah, I share the same opinion. Actually, I teach a course where, as part of the topic, which is about poverty and inequality, in Hong Kong, I both criticize and praise the government. And I never heard, or never anyone came to me and say, oh yeah, you can't do anything, or you can say that. No, so far, no problem on that front.
But please also refers to the example I show you in the slides. I think that's a very interesting one.
Thank you both very much.
Yeah, thank you all. I think we've got time for Miguel. Miguel Lim, can you come in, please?
Hi. Yes. Hi, Simon. Hi, Hugo and William. Thank you very much. Just to the point, how do you think the national security law affects China-focused research and teaching communities outside Hong Kong?
I honestly don't know how to answer that one.
Well, that could be quite sensitive. I would say that if you read those reports, or there's some commentaries, academic or scholarly commentaries, there's some reports about people's concerns on having partnerships or collaborations with academics in Hong Kong, especially on sensitive topics, because according to the law, no matter whether or not you are people in Hong Kong people, or whether or not you are in the territories, the behavior you conduct can be supervised by the authority, covered by the law. So that so this is the sensitive part of the issues. So as mentioned by our colleagues, when we do some issues relate to sovereignties issues, this may be relative sensitive ones now.
Yeah, thank you. I think I understand.
At this point, that's a question which the answer will continue to be found, I think. But at this point, I think we'll have to call it a day. But let me say thank you to Hugo and Will. Such good presentation and discussion. And I think you could see from the seriousness and the quality of the questions that people are very interested and very committed to supporting Hong Kong's universities in their present functioning as time goes on. In our little field of higher education studies that you two contribute to, Hong Kong plays a mighty role. We've got there's a galaxy of talent in our small field located in Hong Kong, and we do, think about the welfare and freedoms of our colleagues in Hong Kong. I'm thinking of people like Ka Ho, who plays such a great role at Lingnan and such a leader in many ways. Yang Rui, such an important scholar, working across the China-West divide, saying things that no one else is saying. Jerry Postiglione, tremendously positive influence in trying to sustain productive relationships between the US and China. I mean, and I've had some great conversations. I think of Joseph Chan at University of Hong Kong, that I discussed Confucianism and Aristotelian philosophy with a few years ago, and what a great conversation. And that really influenced my work. And Becky Liu in geography, many others at Hong Kong, really outstanding people. And they're at all five of the leading universities, and at the Baptist University and at Lingnan, you see more and more people playing considerable local, regional, and global roles. So all power to you, and may you continue. Now, speaking of higher education studies, on Thursday this week, we have a new webinar in the program. We have had to postpone a webinar which we were planning to have on Latin America. That's now been shifted to March, but we have a galaxy of talent in the UK, in this case, talking about what is higher education studies and what are its uses. To recall the Clark Kerr terminology, the uses of the university, well, the uses of higher education studies, something, Hugo, we have to continually justify, of course, in our daily work. And we have Paul Ashwin, Golo Henseki, Diana Laurelard, Shinshu, Minto Felix, and David Mills, all addressing that topic. So we look forward to seeing you in 2 days' time. So come back again, Will and Hugo. We really valued having you on today. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Simon.